test. With me today is my co-host Lindsay Thompson of Henry Bemis Books in Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome, Lindsay.
Hi, Steve, and thanks for having me back this week. Thorne Donnelly, our co-host, is in Boston. He's with classes for the UVA Book School up there, so we're hoping to have a report from him next week. I'm told Kara Accettola, our co-host from the Book Fair live shows, will be dropping in today. And as always, I'm looking forward to visiting with your charming bride, Edie.
It's always a pleasure to be here. You can join the Be Live community on Facebook at Be Livers. That's B-E, capital L-I-V-E-R-S, and see how easy it is to use. But for the next hour, we hope you'll join us and not go anywhere else. Right, Lindsay?
Exactly, Steve. If you just click the link on the Facebook page for the Rare Book Cafe, you'll see a link there to this show, and you need to be using the Chrome browser. But if you click that link in Facebook and follow the prompts, it'll activate your computer or your phone or whatever you're using, and you'll drop into the cafe lobby where you'll be able to see the program and hear us mumbling about stuff for the next hour. Now, if you want to join in, which we hope you'll do, Alan Smith, the producer, can put you right in. All you need to do is look in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. You'll see a little brownish tablet page. That's the online comments section. Just type in you'd like to join, and we'll bring you in. If you're feeling shy, you can just type your comments in there. You can also type comments if you're watching us live on the Facebook or Florida Antiquarian Book Fair pages. Those will pop up, and we'll do our best to respond to them. So, Steve, it's been a whole week. What's been going on?
Well, it's not quite fully recovery from the book fair. I'm still working in the warehouse. And then I just found out that I'm getting a major increase in my warehouse. So it's time to look for an office or possibly a store again. I don't know if I'm thrilled about that or not. I think if I was up north, it would be easier to dispose of what's in the warehouse. But you know, these are the problems that come in all variations when you are in the wonderful world of rare books. However, in going through the warehouse, I was looking for some things that I couldn't find and found some things that I wasn't looking for. And I'm not sure, I don't think I've ever really shown this anywhere. Let me take it out of the plastic so it will show better on the camera. Now, I ask, can you read who the heading is? What does it say? Tell me to move it closer or further away.
Pretty good. It says, bought of Philip Stephen King, parliamentary and general bookseller.
Okay. You passed over the buzz line. Stephen King.
Yes.
I'm curious to see what happens when I post this in the site called Stephen King Book Collectors, just because it's a crazy novelty. You know, I've had this for a while, and I said one of these days I'm going to do something with it. And now that I found out, you know, there's 25 different places that I know of, at least on Facebook, that you can go to, from Autographs 101 to We Love End Papers. So I found the Stephen King group. I thought possibly, you know, it might be interesting to see what kind of comments would go with it. By no means is it anything rare and valuable, but I just think it's an interesting pun. You just never know. What else has been going on? Well, I'm happy to say one thing, that as soon as I find my note right here, October 19th, I thought I had the note right here, October 19th, in Stuart, Florida. I know it's a ways off, but mark your calendars down anyway. We're telling you about the book fair next year. So October 19th, I'm going to be doing a seminar at the Bryant Library in Stuart, Florida, from about 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. There's 230 seats in the audience. It is all free. Thorne and I will be there together. We're going to be doing something with, if you bring books, we will happily give you a free evaluation. And if you can, mark that down on your calendars. We would love to see some people there that we know. And it's geared more for the beginner and the person that's in it for about a year or less. We have a pretty good seminar that we do on that. One of the other things that I'd like to point out, just for general information purposes in the wonderful world of rare books, Sharif Afifi is a conservationist who is the chief curator at the library in Alexandria, Egypt. Sharif, and I'm spelling that Sherif, and his last name is Afifi, Afifi. He has a site that's a free download called Marble Paper Guide. He's been a guest on Bucks. We hope to get him on the cafe one day. But he just put a new posting up on this sign. And if anybody is watching this and you have an interest, because there's a group called We Love End Papers, if you're interested in marbled end papers and his apps, by all means, check it out. It's Sharif Afifi. You can find him on Facebook. And I see Kara is posting to a group. Am I seeing that because I'm looking at my emails in general and it has nothing to do with us, or is she communicating something with us?
Well, it depends on where you're looking.
On the bottom right-hand corner of my screen. I guess it was because she just posted something somewhere. I thought you had mentioned she might join us. What's been going on with you, Lindsay? What's going on in your book world these few days?
It's a big month for celebrations and observations. One of the things that we try to do with Henry Bemis Books is tie our promotions to things going on in the big world. And so every month has commemorative events in it. And so this month of May alone is a Jewish Heritage Month, Asian Pacific Heritage Month, Short Story Month, and International Zombie Awareness Month. And so that gave me the opportunity to pull out all my zombie materials, starting with my collection of books by Mario Acevedo. He's a Denver writer, but in his 50s, and this is one of them, Jailbait Zombie. He has basically taken the hard-boiled detective genre and turned it inside out. And he has created a character called Felix Gomez, who comes back from the Gulf War, not only a hard-bitten veteran of combat, but a vampire. And so he has all the traditional attributes of the vampire, the problems with daylight, the shape-shifting issues, but he's made him a fascinating character in terms of a modern-day private detective who just happens to need to keep blood in bags in his refrigerator all the time. Thankfully, he has a friend at the hospital. But one of the funny things about his books is that he writes about sampling different blood types as though he were Robert Parker in the Wine Spectator. And it's just, if you like the hard-boiled detective genre, but you're also intrigued by fantasy fiction or just updates and variations on the old Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade style, the Felix Acevedo books are a good introduction to that. I should mention another variation on that is a wonderful series of books by Jim Butcher, which feature a wizard in Chicago who's also a private detective named Harry Dresden. And those go off in a completely different direction. One of the great things about melding a genre like detective fiction with fantasy is that you can go anywhere you want, literally. And the Dresden books, I just came across about 6-7 years ago, and I've read them all. They're endlessly fascinating. Each stands on its own, and yet they link together so that he develops characters, even secondary and tertiary ones, into almost full-blown characters in the bigger story over time. His novels were adapted into 2 seasons of a series on HBO about 15 years ago I know you can see them on Hulu, and I'm sure if they're on Hulu, they must be available in other places. Extremely well done. And so that's been one of our big celebrations this month. This week we've been doing Asian Pacific Islander heritage. We've been celebrating a lot of our books by and about Asian authors. And next week we'll be gearing up for Jewish Heritage Month. I've got a fascinating book by Jacob Marcus, a great American Jewish scholar of the 20th century, whose first book was a hopeful and hopelessly optimistic book published in 1934 about how he thought the rise of the Nazis would not necessarily be a bad thing for German Jews. I have a rare autographed copy of that book that makes fascinating reading in the context of the shape of things to come. But I see, as I start to beeble on here, that my co-host from the Book Fair Daily at the Book Fair a few weeks ago, Kara Accettola, is here. And as always, just in time to bail me out. So welcome.
Yay. Bail you out? Lindsay, I came to hear the beebling. Are you kidding? I'm just here to listen. The salon is open, no?
You have time on your hands.
I was actually just working on a new collection of Eastern European illustrated children's books, so that's kind of fun. I just started digging in, and but then I saw Alan put the link up, and I thought, well, I'll pop in and say hi.
Oh, good. Well, have you had any, aside from what you've been cataloging, have you had any other interesting ephemera float past this week?
Let's see. Yes. You know what I did? This is a nuts and bolts kind of thing. Really what has been the major thrust of my week was actually maintenance, and that's picture maintenance. I got a scanner, a flatbed scanner. Perfect timing because I just had a loss, and I had to do a lot of thinking about how I was going to start taking care of photographs, and something that, a lot of us deal with. How do we take care of these photos and these archives of personal photos as well as archives of business photos? So in thinking about scanning in some of these precious photos to share with family members, like, oh my gosh, I am like 600 or 700, being honest here, photos shy, SKUs that I've cataloged. I just get in a cataloging mode and I pencil in a SKU if I'm lucky, but my hands are typing and I want to just catalog faster and faster. And you know what happens is a year later, you're like, oh my gosh, I better work on the pictures of my backlog. And so I have been scanning the ephemera, and it's working beautifully. Don't have to deal with lighting issues and, angling my camera or my iPhone the right way. And it shows, it's kind of like HDTV. It shows every flaw, which is wonderful. We're not in the business of masking flaws. We need to let people know if there's a little, loss on an edge. The scanner just grabs it. So my week has been consumed with updating, and it'll be interesting to see, considering that we move into so much more of a visual nature of our work, how actually having photos next to my little ding-dongity descriptions will help the material come to even more life. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Kara, I think what you put on the ephemera site is really, really interesting stuff. Whatever imagery techniques you're using and things, very, very nice presentations.
Thank you so much. Oh, that's really nice. Oh, you're talking about the Facebook, not the Ephemera Society page, which I admin on, but you're talking about the it's not little, but the for sale. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Sure. I was watching I watch all those sites for A, business, and B, for the radio program, for this program, or wherever we can get information from.
Yeah.
And knowing your name and then seeing what you put on and how you presented it, and your prices are amazing. I mean, you really got a handle on it. You really got a good handle on it.
This is like the fun page. Like, this is like this is the coffee house of our business, is that site. that thread, that page is just so fun. It's kind of like if we're a bookstore and we've got the rare cases and we've got the deep stacks, I feel like the ephemera page is the front case where we just get to show everybody some fun stuff and not, everything doesn't have to be so serious and so seriously described, and it's not these, $200 letters. It's just but what's really exciting to see is everyone's engagement with material from all different eras. And, it's really kind of my relaxation. Yeah.
There be no literary snobbery in ephemera.
Exactly. Yes, that is true. There is not that elitist thing isn't happening. Is well, that's 1945. Yeah, no, there's none of that. It's really kind of always been a great engaged community, and I love that. I love that page. It's seriously like therapy.
A shout out to Dina Ungarden. She was at the fair. She was actually at the Florida Fair.
So Dina and Bonnie, what's funny is I've been shopping from them. There's only about 3 or 4 ephemera people who go to the West Palm. It's not the big, $10,000 booth antique show. It's this small, it's not smaller in scale, but it's more fun. What's the exact name of it? We can plug it, but it's the West Palm Beach Fairgrounds monthly antique show. And again, it's not the big mega one, which is the same people that put on Baltimore. It's, it's one of those 6-day, $20,000 Victorian bookcase fairs. This is really kind of fun, accessible stuff. There's only about 3 or 4 people that come there with good paper. So I've been digging around in her and a couple other people's paper for years. And I remember the day she told me, "Hey, Kara," I'm not going to do her accent, but I would love to. But, Kara. She's like, we started this little Facebook page, and it's really kind of fun. And I am not going to lie, and I'm lie, but I'm very honest. A lot of people start Facebook pages and start things, right? And they have the best intent, and it's like a 10-person group. You know what I'm saying, right? Like if there's
their growth has been amazing.
Doing things, and so I thought, oh, that's really cute. It's like a rocket, It blew up, and it's so fabulous.
I will tell you, like I said before, the groups that I post in or watch, when I first started 2 years ago, it would take a few minutes and maybe I'd reach a couple of hundred. Then it went to a little higher number. Right. But if you add up all the numbers of members in those groups, and ephemera and booksellers FBA have grown in the thousands in the last year and a half or so, it is a total of over 150,000 people in those 25 groups.
Yeah.
And they have just grown in bounds. And you're right.
And your audience, Steve and Lindsay and Thorne and T, your audience. An amazing thing also, which when you start it, you never know if something's going to be in a vacuum and just kind of like kind of a couple people hanging out and are there any eyeballs on it. But you guys have really kept up the consistency and the amazing level of content and programming and gotten some amazing traction for your show. You got these people who watch it weekly, I'm sure religiously. They're probably watching now. They could comment. And I know someone.
We would love to hear from them. If anybody is out there in the live audience right now, please contact us, communicate with us, talk with us. We would love to hear what's on your mind. We'd love to know who you are and how you heard about us. And we would also love to hear programming ideas. What is it that you would like to hear on an episode of the Rare Book Cafe or Bucks on the Bookshelf? We'd be happy to take requests.
And in that vein, I should mention to everybody that we want to congratulate one of our viewers, Judy Reese Yancey, who watches us on Facebook. She is the winner of our first contest.
What?
Alan captured a screenshot of Stephen looking shocked.
I saw that.
Week's program. We'll ask him in a minute to recreate that Edward Monk look of
We should all do it.
And Judy gave the best caption, which you'll have to go to the page to see. And we will be sending her a Antiquarian Book Fair tote bag. So you see, not only can you be on TV if you come to this show, but you can win swag.
Swag! Triple swag if somebody uses said tote bag on next year's beige carpet.
Exactly. The beige carpet sample has been saved, and it will be back next year. We're looking forward to that. We're going to ask even sillier questions than we did this year. And we just had something from Forrest Proper turn up.
Hey, Forrest, welcome.
Hi, Forrest.
While we're waiting for it, he says, how can I get an entire catalog done this afternoon while watching your wonderful show as well? And
get the book elves to work. Give them their little tiny cups of coffee.
Well, what I wonder is how he gets any work done with all those cats crawling across his desk all the time.
True. That's so true. So
Forrest, thank you. I say thank you for joining us.
When I heard that Carol was coming on, I wanted to get something ephemeral that I have come across and see if you've seen anything comparable to it.
Ooh, let's see.
It's a dinner party record.
Oh.
In the 1920s by Brentanos.
Brentanos, yeah. Let's see.
And it's got gilt edges.
Oh, yes.
The cover's a bit worn because it's soft cover, but inside you have a 2-page spread for each of your dinner parties. One for the...
Oh my gosh, I've never seen that, but that's so Brentanos 20s, isn't it?
Table. And then on the other page...
When we were documenting our Gatsby moments.
You have your guests.
Lindsay, are there signatures in there?
It's all in longhand of who the guests were, what the occasion was, where it was given and the date, who was unable to attend, the wines you served, and at the bottom, the particulars of the table decorations.
Oh, that's so, oh my gosh.
This starts at 12 East 81st Street in New York.
Yep.
On November 23rd, 1927, Mother Ingersoll's birthday. And it goes forward until it peters off a bit during the war, but they were still pretty busy. In the last event from early 1950 is Ingersoll's birthday. He turned 50, and it looks like there were 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 11, 13, 15, 17, 19, 21 people for dinner.
Wow. That's a nice gathering.
A quarter of a century almost of dinner parties.
That is so... How many pages are complete?
About half.
Half? Oh, that's awesome.
It's
any interesting recognizable signatures by...
Yeah, any notables?
Not that I have found yet, but I'm just beginning to dig into this and figure out first where the house is in New York and who has owned it. And
right, exactly.
Yeah. Good game plan.
Context and help me understand.
See if that's 20s or if it was, I mean, if they were having 21-person dinner parties and logging it, they clearly were, not hurting because they had leisure time and they were throwing big shindigs. So,
The question is, did the 21 chairs and dining room table make it into this century, or did they get chopped up in the we can't stand big furniture period of the 50s and the 60s?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I would think that hopefully somebody went modernist on them and maybe they're still there. That is really cool. I love things like that, even when it's a little bit contemporary, when it shows us, that the social history and the social impact. And I love things like that. I might have to reach for if I get a show and tell, I did think of the thing that was probably the same era, and which is a little late for me. Once I move into the 20s and the 30s, I sometimes get a little less excited. But that was 100 years ago. And it's always interesting to me to see something that has to do with women's, comings and goings. And this is that I thought was going to be Snoozeville, because it was really small, and I thought it was just going to be one of those logging, the really mundane stuff. And it's actually a diary of her very, very, very detailed, total TMI details about her conception and pregnancy and birth and post-birth. But what's cool about it is that it is so vividly descriptive, and there wasn't, you in the 20s, to me, there was, my gosh, there was a lot more quieted kind of atmosphere around the sensibilities of the fair sex and the delicacy of conditions, right? So for her, it's almost like she was a doctor, but she wasn't. I researched her because she was so clinical about, her daily experiences. And I loved seeing that from the 20s. It's something you would expect from a modern woman, but she was so hyper aware of her bodily changes. So I love things like that. That's just straight up women's studies for me.
Well, what I found interesting about this book is just, we're so food obsessed now.
Yes. It gives the menu. Does it give the menu?
People had, for example, for Eleanor and John Ingersoll's dinner, January 19th, 1929, hors d'oeuvres, clear soup, lobster Newburg in a basket, breast of chicken on mushroom sauce, peas, potatoes, heart of lettuce with cream, cheese, and Van Leduc, vanilla ice cream with hot cherry sauce, cocktails, liqueurs, highballs, and the flowers were in red glass, and they were white.
That is remarkable. I mean, we've obviously loved manuscript menus because it shows us a vernacular table expression and not just, a restaurant's expression, even if she had help in the kitchen. But for it to also talk about the decorative details and to be able to get the full visual of what that table felt like, that is crazy remarkable. The only other place you'd really be able to capture that would be from magazines of the era, which would show the ideal. And here it's showing it in actual execution. And that is very, very, very neat for a lot of different of the social sciences to have and examine. What I love about the intricacies of food is what year was that? I mean, this is post-crash. Okay.
And in 10 months, everything fell out.
Yes. I mean, so that's really when you contextualize it that way. But I love, you can tell, where were they shopping? When were we importing? Had Paris already hit us with, marron glacé? So somebody already knew to go to some little fancy place on 84th Street and get something cool in a jar to serve with ice cream, as opposed to the recipe books from, rural Pennsylvania, which are going to show far larger spans between trends because people are going to be cooking, grandma's recipes and not quickly turning around what's trending in the times for the new, haven't you tried our new asparagus, our thing, Jello, or the clear soup. I love that was a thing. Clear soup.
There are things from the past that we don't even understand now. In Harold Macmillan's memoirs, the Prime Minister of Britain, he grew up in the height of the Edwardian era when the empire's sun never set. And I remember him writing about how you could go to the market and there were a dozen different kinds of lemons from different parts of the world. Well, we don't even know that there's but one kind of lemon. It's sort of this size and yellow, and we prefer to buy it in a little plastic thing we can squirt it out.
No, we want Myers lemons. They're lovely with soft flesh and. But yeah, exactly. It is one thing it nods to is the biodiversity and our curiosity with the exotica that was trending at the time. You always see the food and the travel brochures and the fiction all kind of aligning with what was deemed to be exotic at that point in time. And if you could serve something exotic and showcase what you had either bought or just learned the recipe of, or had maybe a family member bring back from some, overlanding in Europe, that was also your way to kind of stand out and show your classness or your classlessness, I suppose, too.
with a K.
Yeah.
It's the world of the E.M. Forster, English.
Yes, exactly.
Traveling and complaining that it's not like home.
Exactly. What I wouldn't give for the liver and onions on 82nd Street. I'm tired of this. What is this French crap?
Want a slice of New York pizza.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. That was them, not me. I don't want liver and onions. That was them dreaming about it. But food is so evocative and powerful. Yeah, I'm kind of like, when I think of our foodie dealers, it's John Lindgren, Rabelais books, great bookstore and rare book dealer in Maine, who's also very, just super sophisticated in the way he thinks about food culture. And Lizzie Young, Roy Young's daughter, who's now Lizzie Young Rare Books, and she's a culinary specialist. And she was a pastry chef before she was a book dealer, so it definitely is, part of her process. And then also Vic Zashek, Tavistock Books, who we think of as being a Dickensian specialist, but he also does a lot of wine and culinary things, a lot of California aspects of that, which is interesting to see how long it took them to get the trends that were popping up on the East Coast from European travel. When did Californians, see that? I had some letterhead this week. When things were fancy, that's why I was thinking about the import. I had 1920 something letterhead where they were known for being the purveyor of fancy dates. This is when people were just starting to even a little bit poke into Morocco and poke into these areas, and so dates travel well. And so having he's writing a woman in like Ohio, and the level of customer service in the letter assuring her that her dates were packed lovingly, and did she receive them well and come to us again. I'm thinking, how much were the dates? Because it's like she bought a car. She got that level of service, But anyway.
It's interesting. Lizzie, about 2 years ago, exhibited in Florida, in St. Petersburg at the FABA show. I met her father, Roy. He was an architect dealer, if I remember it correctly, in Liabda. To see her, another generation of book dealers, was really, heartwarming, but more so the knowledge that she imparted. I mean, I've been doing this for a really long time. And I guess if you're not, as you're just saying it, if you're not in the circles to hear it, when she told me what she was looking for in the early household books, it made perfect sense. But when she was talking about what you're talking about now, Lindsay, from the 20s and 30s, that, those average household books that are very collectible, desirable today, and show this great glimpse of history that you're talking about, kind of opened my eyes to it. I really never thought of it that way till she had mentioned it.
Yeah. She is so knowledgeable and awesome. And her dad, gosh, his aesthetic is incredible. His material is just remarkable. The height of
I'm old. He's older. He's been around longer.
Well, it's just a totally different style. We have actually been in repeated cities. We've been across aisle mates or booth mates, and actually Lizzie and I have shared a booth in Boston. But for years before that, we were across from each other in a bunch of different cities, and I love both of their styles. Yeah, awesome.
And of course, the wonderful thing about food is it's universal. There's a story comes to mind about Catherine Ann Porter and William Faulkner, two of the most successful and famous writers in the world in the 50s, sitting together on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, having dinner one night in the summer. And there was something about the light and the temperature and everything that makes Paris Paris that made them start talking about lima beans back in the South.
Oh my gosh.
Faulkner said, the lima beans will be coming in about now. Porter took a sip of her drink and said, yes, the white speckled ones.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful, beautiful. I love that. It absolutely is. I mean, I am someone who always thinks in agricultural metaphors. It's how I frame my life. I just have farm girl in my blood and my bones. And it's the most primary thing we have to do. And yet it's elevated to such a memory space, and it's so beautiful, and it's how we share moments and memories with each other. Every elevated occasion that we mark, births and deaths and the major, major milestones of our existence are marked with food. So all the more to that beautiful book you found, and find more like it, because it's what creates so much for us. I don't know why I don't specialize in it, but I don't have to specialize. I can have fun when I find it.
Stay safe. Specialize in generalities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, as we wind up this segment, I want to thank Kara for dropping in. I know Steve has some interesting things to talk about yet to come. If you want to stay with us, Kara, you're welcome to.
Thanks.
But let me remind everyone that you're watching the Rare Book Cafe. We're a weekly live streaming production sponsored by the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair. We're appearing thanks to a beta test version of BeLive.tv, an Israeli startup app. You can find them at BeLive on Facebook. You could also find a community of BeLive fans at BeLivers on Facebook. It's a remarkably easy system to use. You can literally set up a show like this in 2 clicks. And that's part of why we've come to it, because it is so easy to put on and so easy to invite you to join us in. So now it's time for a few minutes with Steve on the life of a collector who was so influential in his day that even the books he owned 75 years after he died are more valuable for his having owned them. So Steve, tell us a little bit about A. Edward Newton.
Well, A. Edward Newton, and I've got to say, when I started out in book collecting in the very beginning years, I wanted to learn as much as I could about the history of the trade. At that time, 2 names came up. One of them still comes up, and that's A.S.W. Rosenbach. But I'm asking, Lindsay, I know you knew of him, Kara, I'm sure you do. But I asked this question, do you think history treated them equally? Are you familiar with A. Edward Newton, Kara?
Not on the level that I am with Rosenbach and Krauss and some of that, I don't know.
Okay.
Well.
In a confession that leads along the lines of the dog ate my homework, I've read everything he has. I have a handful of things here, but I am drawing a mental blank on some of the more factual things that I would have wanted to say about him. But what I can say is this, from my interpretation, having read about Rosenbach and having read about Newton, is the feeling I got along the lines of it was, for some reason, Newton didn't garner the total respect of the community the way Rosenbach did. Lindsay, you mentioned earlier before. Do you kind of agree, disagree? Am I out in left field with my?
No, I think you're spot on. Rosenbach was the rock star of 20th century book collecting. He was a great self-promoter, and he was also not only a collector, but a buyer and seller. I think primarily he was a buyer and seller. And so he was also a better writer than Newton was. And so his memoirs are a People magazine of book collecting. He was a great name dropper. He was just unscrupulous enough to be wildly successful. You can imagine him being the guy from the Texas University in A.S. Byatt's novel Possession, hard on the heels of the poems, willing to do anything to get them for the greater glory of himself and the collection. Plus, I think Rosenbach had more money, and he also set up a monument to himself and his brother with the Rosenbach Library and Museum in Philadelphia. Which
yeah.
And
was exactly the opposite. Go ahead.
And go ahead. I'm sorry, Lindsay.
I was just going to say Newton was almost the opposite. I don't know how he made his money, but he really didn't come into public notice as a collector until about 1907. So he had about 30 years as a collector where he wrote some books and articles, but mostly he was a true collector. He never sold a book he bought. He was not a dealer in any sense of the term. A lot of his fame was private. Every Christmas from 1907 to 1939, he would publish a small privately printed book like the one Stephen is holding for his friends. And he became famous by word of mouth. And then he published a book called Amenities of Book Collecting in 1918, which, despite having an awkward and kind of arch title, sold 25 or 30,000 copies and was considered a bit of a bestseller. But he never really was anything more than a man who reveled in collecting books. And I was struck by some of the things he used to say about it, which was, he called it the great game of book collecting. And for him, it was the thrill of the hunt and going to the book auctions. But he said the best thing about book collecting was the amazing and delightful acquaintances he made that ripened into friendships with other book people. And he had this self-effacing modesty about him that was the antithesis of Rosenbach. At one point he said about going to auctions, when I'm going to be extravagant, I always like the encouragement of my wife, and I generally get it. Because his wife was unusual for the time in that she was really a co-collector with him of this vast collection that they had.
I guess I'm lucky today. My wife, too. We met at a garage sale over books. Can't be better. And she loved my gun collection. But what I've got to say is this, and I say this, and then, yeah, I do remember it correctly. I kind of dubbed him the Clown Prince, but, you know, maybe the court jester. I think he might have even made a referral to that about himself somewhere. That the one thing that I was going to say before it would have fit in a little better is that on top of all the other differences between Rosenbach and Newton, James Joyce wrote the poem about Rosenbach, not about Newton. And that's a poem that every once in a while I've quoted on the air and updated. So since I said it, I'll tell you the history of it. James Joyce and Rosenbach were at an auction for the manuscript copy of Ulysses. Obviously, James Joyce could not afford to outbid the deep pockets of Rosenbach, and Rosenbach went away with the manuscript. And James Joyce went to a Boston newspaper the next day. I think I remember somebody saying this poem, the original is in a museum, and the poem is this: Rosy Brook, he bought a book, though he didn't know how to spell it. Such is the lure of literature for the lad who can buy and sell it.
Very nice.
Update me, and Lindsay will agree. I can sells it, but I can't spells it.
Well, it's interesting.
I want that for my book plate.
Rosenbach.
I'm sorry?
I think I want that for my book plate.
I can sells it, but I can't spells it? Okay.
Rosenbach and Newton knew each other and crossed paths, although I haven't found any good stories about that, except for one, which was right before Newton died in 1940. Rosenbach put on a 2-day auction of rare books for the war effort of the American Red Cross. And Newton donated a Chelmsford Chaucer,
Wow.
and then promptly died. And his widow gave a first edition of Boswell's Life of Johnson.
Nice.
Then later in the year, after Newton had died, this really was when he became famous to a lot of people. His entire collection was put on the market because he wanted everybody else in the world to have the same thrill of recollecting what he had collected.
I still have the 4-volume catalog.
Yeah, the catalog.
The
catalog is a standard reference now for
like a streeter. It sounds like it's a streeter.
And when the sale was coming up, they put 50 of his books on display at the Free Library of Philadelphia, which is now attached to the Rosenbach Museum. And 68,000 people came to see the show. And on the first day of the Sotheby Park Burnett auction in New York of the Newton collection, 1,500 people showed up.
Wow.
Although, oddly enough, part of why Newton is so famous now is because he was a benchmark for the vagaries of the economics of book collecting. Because his collection, nearly all the big lots lost money over what he had paid for them.
Wow.
He had paid $60,000 for a first folio in 1927. And in 1940, it brought the equivalent of $22,000.
Wow, interesting.
Because he had bought them in the roaring 20s. One thing I didn't know about was that Jerome Kern's estate in 1929 was the height of the frenzy for American high-end book collecting to that point. And it became the benchmark for inflated prices, kind of like when Stephen King became the Beanie Baby of the early 20th century. And with the war on and the uncertainties that came with it, They just didn't bring the kind of prices in 1940 that they did a decade earlier. Although, curiously, in 1941, the New York Times ran an article about how, but for the war, the prices probably would have been even lower, because once the war was truly at America's doorstep, they ran an article about how art, buying and selling art became a way that people were looking to put their money into things that would hold their value and could be easily moved.
Mm-hmm. True. Good point.
So he was a unique and interesting character. I just wanted to mention that if anyone has a hankering to read some of Newton, you can find his Amenities of Book Collecting on projectgutenberg.com, which is a free book online site that archives a lot of out-of-copyright works.
And while we're recommending reading from that time period, let me recommend one book. I don't know, there's two variations of it. Initially, it was 2 or 3 parts in wrappers, and then it was hardcover. And that's Harry Shapiro's This Book Collecting Racket. It gives you great insight into the book-selling history of the time. It's where I've learned about how LEC was actually formed, and many other anecdotes of the time period. Lindsay, I have somebody waiting in the wings to talk about miniature books for a few minutes.
Well, let's play Deus Ex Machina and bring her on stage.
I have one question from the last segment, and we can tie them together. The burning question from that in my mind is, I am really curious to trace the Newton Kelmscott or the Rosenbach War Kelmscott. I'd like to see where it ended up with the Chaucer, which one that was.
That would be interesting to
find
know.
out, but
that would be interesting to know, and I'll bet it's traceable.
Yeah, I think it would be. At a sale that big. I mean, it's possible that it went just kind of quiet after that, but that would be a good one to trace. And I have personal curiosity about that particular book. So, yeah. In fact, maybe
in 77 years, it's bound to have come back on the market.
It's probably come back up, and I know who might know exactly where it is because he's got the most accurate census of the Chaucers. So I'll find out and get back to you.
Oh, cool. That would be fun to do a follow-up.
Yeah. I'm going to write it down so I don't forget. Because I will. And I got another book to add to my reference shelf. I know we must have talked about Newton in my reference book class when we were moving through Streeter and through all of these kind of early century big sales that kind of defined the goalposts within the 20th century. So I got to revisit my notes and see what I remember reading. But that was a very good question posed by Steve. But I think the answer, it makes me curious to read about Newton, but I think that it was Rosenbach's, had so much broader of a reach as far as people who worked and studied and, apprenticed under him. It's so far reaching, the people that shop and that particular collecting arm affected. And I think that's why, not to mention cementing things with the museum itself. But then again, history frames things differently, and then sometimes things snowball from there.
Well, Newton was apparently, he traveled a lot, but not like Rosenbach did.
Right.
Mostly he hung out outside Philly. He had an estate called Oak and was sort of a gentleman farmer.
Oh.
And he apparently liked checked suits and bow ties.
Oh, he's a man after your heart.
Well, I draw the line at the checked suits.
Oh, okay. I see an Edie.
Hey, hi, how are you?
Hi.
Did you get to hear me when I talked about the set that I got?
What we'd like to do is let our viewers know that we have had the equivalent of the 16 and a half minute gap on the Nixon tapes today.
Woo!
Oh,
We lost our signal just as Edie Eisenstein was coming on. So let me remind you, you're watching part 2 of today's episode of the Rare Book Cafe, streaming live on BeLive TV and visible on Facebook at the Rare Book Cafe and Florida Antiquarian Book Fair pages. I'm Lynn Thompson with Henry Bemis Books in Charlotte. Kara Accettola is with us, sent from Florida. And Edie Eisenstein, our small book lady from Miami, is going to tell us about some things she picked up at the book fair this year. So Edie, let's try and do it again.
I certainly shall, and thank you very much, Lindsay. First of all, when you go to the book fair, you do so much more than see people buying and selling books. You meet wonderful people, you see fantastic displays, and one of them that was there this year that fortunately I got to see was put on by the Tampa University Press. And they had done a special edition of woodcuts. This one was the common one, not signed, but on very special paper. They had used the same paper to make a box to house it and the deluxe edition, which is signed and also limited to 75 copies, of which I have copied 25.
And what is the title of the book?
Woodcuts.
Ah.
It's Lansky, his woodcut miniatures. And this Lankes, Lankes, was an artist that did an awful lot of different things. He was an author, he was an artist, he was a photographer, he did things on consignment, etc. And when I researched him and I found out that they had done this at the University of Tampa Press, his family had cooperated. They gave him this special paper that they had gotten, the Japanese paper. They had gotten the original presses that he used, that they were allowed to use. And one of the things was that he used to do Pennsylvania Dutch barns. He did Beatrice Potter illustrations. He did book plates. He did prints. In one of my researches, they said he did 1,000, and another research it said 1,400. But the thing is that the family cooperated and used this Reeves, R-I-B-E-S, paper that was his in order to do the 200 limited edition.
Nice.
And Sean Donnelly from
Great
Dorland Books.
Yeah.
Oh, I love him.
We love Sean.
You know Sean?
We love him. Yeah, of course.
I know. And he was influential in doing this set with the University Press.
Yeah.
So it all gets tied in, and if you go to the book fair, you can meet him in his booth, which is always nice. Something else that I got this year, that Henry Zukowski came up to me and said, Edie, it's not a book, but would you like this? And he gave me this, and it's a book eraser. And on that, it says Pittsburgh branch in March of 2006. So, of course, I am delighted to add that to my miniature books. You know me, Lindsay. I like anything miniature. And the Saint Ange Press, which is very collectible, okay, in itself. They always do beautiful books, gold gilded on the top, bottom, and foredge. And this one was on St. Augustine from 1565 to 1965. again in a limited edition of 2000, but not signed and not numbered. But I'm happy to have it. And it was printed from Spectrum type on old Kentucky linen paper in Holland and bound by Proust in Amsterdam, Holland. But all of theirs are always beautiful, always with little illustrations, etc. I love my little books. What can I say? At the book fair this year, it was just absolutely wonderful. I would like to give out a shout to the security people who were there, who were wonderful. And when Steve didn't feel well, she got her grandson to come over at the end, which was wonderful. But at the book fair, you meet interesting people from the time you sign in the lobby with the bibliophile people, all of the exhibitors that are interesting characters, of which we are two, TWO. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience to be there.
It really is. I have a question for Edie. Unless there's a question waiting from one of the commenters. I've got a question because we haven't really talked much, but I don't know. Have you ever been to one of the conclaves? Ever been to one of the Miniature Book Society? I don't know if you're still traveling.
Well, I have never been to a conclave. One time they were going to have one in Naples, so I was going to be able to get it. There have been conclaves in Europe. Yeah. This one is going to be on the West Coast, but I have never made it to... What?
This year in Oakland is not too far. It's better than Amsterdam as far as a flight, you know?
True. And Oakland, it's wonderful. Karen Nyman and I, we write back and forth all the time. I have been fortunate enough to get the little bookends that they've given out and little, like little goodie bags. That's the only way that I can describe it, that they will give to the attendees. But I have not made it to a conclave. But Michael Garbert, who is from England, was the one that first started me on mini. And he had one in his hometown at one time. One that is on my bucket list. On my bucket list is to get to a miniature book conclave. Yes. And one day I shall.
Do you and Steve still travel up and down to New York ever?
We don't travel as much as we used to.
Okay.
As it turns out, we're going to be going up to northern Florida to Live Oak in a couple of months, and he's going to be doing one of his seminars up there. But it's not the same as the one that's going to be in October. But it's our traveling days after I had a stroke and I had a brain tumor removed. And my health issues limited the travel to go up and down like road. Yeah. We've done book fairs in Texas. We've done book fairs in New York. We've done book fairs in Baltimore, etc. But our travel days are definitely limited.
Yeah, I understand that. Actually, myself.
Hopefully we'll do it again.
Yes. I'm going to dig in through all my stuff and see if any kind of reference material and prospectuses and different little tiny things and swag that I've gotten over the last couple of years with regard to miniatures. I'm not traveling myself these days, but I'm going to dig, Edie, because if I find anything, I'm going to make you a little packet and send it down to you, because I caught Mindel's exhibit on books at the Grolier, and I might have a little bit of material on Jean-Francois Bellin's small collection that he's permanently housed in drawers there. Anything good that I find in my piles of paper, I'm going to send down to you, okay?
Thank you. I would love it. I enjoy it so much. I do have a few books on mini. I just find I'm a klutz, if you know what a klutz is. I'm a super klutz where I could walk into an empty room and trip over my own feet. But these miniature books fascinate me, and I just so thoroughly enjoy my collection. I've just started this year to sell my duplicates. Okay. I was fortunate enough to know Don Brady, and I had bought before he died, I had gotten everything he had in his house. And people knew that I had duplicates, and they called and they said,
Yeah.
well, Don is not well and you have X copies of this. Yes, I do. Would you sell one? No, I don't sell. I only buy. I keep. But now I to sell my duplicates and to refine my collection a little bit and keep what I really, really love and decide what I am willing to part with, which is not much.
Right.
Not yet. But it could increase. I'm working on not being a hoarder, if you will, almost a hoarder. I want it all.
Hoarding miniatures is so easy. I mean, I was scouting. I was scouting in upstate New York last year and opened up a shoebox, and it was like I could have fallen in and stayed in there for a few hours because it was just like acorns in a box, but they were miniature books. I mean, so you can really, really, really. You can hoard miniatures. You are cleared for landing for that because it's like.
Thank you.
Nobody can say nothing. Nobody can say nothing. They take up so much, 1 cubic foot, and you've got incredible amount of material. So.
But they are absolutely wonderful. They really and they're fun. They're really fun.
Yeah.
So I am now going to give you back to my handsome husband. And it was a joy seeing you again, Lindsay, a joy meeting you. And I look forward to you finding some treasure for me. That would be great.
Absolutely. Yes. And I'll see you again soon for a big old Edie hug.
Oh, absolutely. I am a hugger.
See you again soon.
How do you know I am a hugger?
Because we've seen each other for years at the Florida Fair, Edie. Yeah. So I'll get another one.
I hug I love Lindsay, is that why you didn't come to the Florida Fair? Because you don't want me to get my hands on you, Lindsay?
No way. No way. Lindsay wants a hug, too.
Of course.
Here we go.
Well, while Steve is getting back in his chair, let me remind everyone that you're watching the Franken broadcast of Rare Book Cafe this week. Somewhat like Caesar's commentaries about Gaul, we are divided today into two parts. And separated by a 20-minute or so technical flaw. We're going to try and stitch the two bits of the program back together after we go off the air. And when we do that, we will post it live as an archive program on our Facebook pages for the Rare Book Cafe and for the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair, and also on the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed to that channel, I can recommend it highly. We have over 150 hours of broadcasts, both connected with past editions of the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair, and also almost a complete run of the first two series of Rare Book Cafe. So that's the place to go back and see us at our best and us at our less than best, and us that are mastering new technologies, which, as you see, is a never-ending task. But we're grateful, I should mention, to BeLive.tv for sharing their beta of this talk show format with us to bring you these broadcasts. They are a startup based in Israel. They make it ridiculously easy to run a program of your own like this. Just 2 or 3 clicks and you're up and going. I can recommend that you look at their website, BeLive.tv, or if you want to chat with other BeLivers and see just how easy it is and get some pats on the shoulder and some encouragement for jumping in, go to the BeLiver group on Facebook. Now I'm going to take a couple of minutes here to talk a little bit about a famous literary friendship. We often think of authors who don't get along and famous literary feuds, but sometimes we also can take note of literary friendships that not only were gratifying between the participants who enjoyed each other's company, but also produced interesting literary results. And a classic example of that is a story of 2 Oxford University undergraduates in the palmy days of the Edwardian era, 115 years ago. One was a South African called Tollers to his friends. He arrived at Exeter College in 1911 to read the classics, which in those days was Greek and Latin. After a year or so, he decided he much preferred English literature. He took a first in English in 1915 and then promptly was called up to service, went off to the war in France, was wounded, wrote letters to his wife back home in a language that he made up and shared with her to get around the censors going through letters and striking out information they thought would give anything away. He had a fascination with philology, the history and basis on which languages develop and evolve and cross-fertilize each other. And when he came back from the war in 1920, demobilized as a lieutenant, he had thought about being an academic, but there were no jobs. Britain was prostrate financially. An entire generation of students and faculty had been wiped out. The great universities were having to rebuild themselves. And so the best job he could get was as an instructor at Leeds University in the north. So off to Leeds, Tollers went. And he made the most of that toehold in academia. Within a few years, he had published a dictionary of Middle English. He had published a translation of the epic poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is still a standard reference. He had published a number of other books and articles and translations, and such was his renown that by the time he was 33 in 1925, he received an offer from Pembroke College at Oxford to become the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professor of Anglo-Saxon. Says every bit as grand as it sounds. And I should tell you just a little bit about how Oxford works as an educational institution. To put that in context, there are 40 plus colleges nowadays that make up the university, and they each have their own faculties, their own staffs, their own governance, but they share back and forth between each other. And within big groups of academic interests like English language or literature, there are shared faculties to which any professor in any college belongs. You become a tutor, which is basically like a graduate assistant, or a fellow, which is a semi-tenured position within a college. Professorships tend to go to endowment positions, either endowed to a particular college, or if you're especially grand and noteworthy, to a university-wide professorship. And the grandest of all are the Six Regis Professorships, which were created in the days of King James II and are by appointment of the Queen. So it was no small deal for Tolkien to come back at 33 and become a professor at Pembroke College. He did well for himself there. One of the nice things about being a professor is you don't have that much teaching to do. You basically schedule a series of lectures each term, and students are free to go to them or not. Each faculty publishes a list of the lectures that are available, and if they fit within your course of study that term, then you go to them. If you don't find them useful, you don't, or if you're just layabout, as I was in my days, you don't go because you just don't go. That's an ancient and honorable tradition at Oxford. Many people never went to any lectures their whole time. That's half of the early stages of Brideshead Revisited, is people recovering from not going to lectures and going to parties instead every night. So Tolkien basically had a job that required him to give lectures that you could go to or not, and write books and do research. The other undergraduate I want to mention was 8 years younger, a guy named Jack from Belfast, and he arrived in 1915 to study English. He had hardly unpacked before he was drafted and sent off to the war. He also fought in France, was injured, demobilized, came back, finished in 1920 with a degree in Greek and Latin. He was so smart and so promising, he stayed on to get a degree in philosophy and ancient history in 1922, and then an English degree in 1923. He taught at University College as a tutor for a year. Tutors basically teach undergraduate students, only you don't do it on a lecture format like we associate with American colleges, where you may have, in a small school, 30 or 40 students in a class, or in a big university, hundreds and hundreds in a great tiered hall. The tutorial system is one-on-one or one-on-two, in which each week of the 8-week terms, and there are 3 8-week terms at Oxford, you meet with your tutor one-on-one or at most with one other student. You're assigned an essay topic. You come in and read the essay to the tutor, who then takes it apart. It's kind of like vivisection, only of your mind. And you get to sit there as your professor, if he's polite, engages in a Socratic dialogue with you about the pluses and minuses of the paper you just read. If he's less so, he may be like my first philosophy tutor, a rather nasty Scotsman named Swan, who had me submit my first essay in advance. And when I sat down in his rooms, he looked at me and said, "Frankly, from reading your essay, I wonder if you have any aptitude at all for the study of philosophy."
Wow.
At which point I suggested, well, things then can only get better.
Exactly. It's only up for.
So this is how Jack began his academic career, teaching people like me who showed no promise whatever. He, however, showed a lot of promise, and in 1925, he was elected a fellow and tutor at Magdalen College, Oxford. Magdalen is one of the grand old colleges going back to the 1400s. Every year on May morning, the city turns out to gather around the Magdalen College Tower, and the choristers climb up to the top of the tower, and as the first rays of dawn show up across the horizon, they sing 2 15th century anthems to celebrate the beginning of spring. And all the pubs open early, and everyone has breakfast, and then you start doing silly things in the streets. In 1978 and 79, I made attempts to be part of the Guinness record-breaking world's longest conga line up the high street, to absolutely no avail, but it was great fun. And you get to see Morris dancers, and if you have friends in other colleges, you can do things like I did with my friend Phil Geddes and go over to St. Edmund Hall's quad and have strawberries with sugar and cream and champagne. So it's a wonderful institution, and it's that plummy Oxford atmosphere that you associate with movies and television, and that Jack fell right into in rooms he had for the next 30 years in a building built in 1714. But all that time, into the 1950s, he was teaching undergraduates. He had a full teaching schedule. He didn't have the big lecture forum. He was just a teacher. And he pursued his other interests. He wrote a lot of articles in popular magazines. He went on the BBC when radio became new. He got his faith back in the early 30s and began writing about Christianity and publishing popular books about it that working people read. And all of those things counted against him in the academic world of Oxford University. So where in 1945 his friend Tollers went to Merton College as the university professor of English language and literature, Lewis was stuck at Magdalen, very comfortably stuck, but stuck nonetheless, until 1954. That's the year that Cambridge University, the place we always referred to as another place, because one dare not speak its name, a new professorship was created in Anglo-Saxon literature at Magdalen College, Cambridge, and they needed a name to kick it off. So they hired Lewis away, and he spent the last decade of his life commuting by train to Cambridge each week, coming home to Oxford on the weekends and writing some of the most famous books of his career. Oddly enough, these two characters did not meet when they were approximately overlapping at Oxford or early in their careers, but on May 11th, 1926, they both happened to be at an attendance optional Oxford University English faculty meeting. And on that afternoon, sitting in a conference room while people droned on about budgets and student allocations, that's how C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien met for the first time. They hit it off. They began dropping by each other's rooms. They both found they liked the same pub, the Eagle and Child in the High Street. They began gathering there and in Tolkien's rooms at Pembroke. They started inviting their friends, Lewis's brother Warnie, and Owen Barfield and Ronald Knox and other British writers who happened to be in town for college events or to give lectures. And out of that came a group called the Inklings, which they called themselves, where they would read their works in progress to each other and critique each other's writing. They loved drinking and smoking cigars and pipes and trading university gossip. And it turned out that nearly all of them at their various universities had been members of the Amanda McKittrick Rose Society. Viewers of this program will recall that I've talked about Mrs. Rose before. She was an Irish novelist of the late Victorian era who is generally agreed to be the worst novelist who ever lived in the English language. If you go to the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair blog page or to my blog page for Henry Bemis Books on Blogger, you can find a biography of Mrs. Rose and some examples of her truly awful work. And even into their 40s and 50s, the Inklings loved to reenact the principal entertainment of Rose Society meetings, which was to read out a selection from one of her novels and see how long you could go before you burst out laughing. So these were wonderful times for these authors, especially during the war when London was more or less evacuated and a lot of people from the Oxford University Press had to move out of their main office in London and back to Oxford. One of those was a writer and an editor, mainly, a self-educated man named Charles Williams, who is the least known of the Inklings, but the author of half a dozen books of what I call supernatural Christianity. These are my college copies. I came across them thanks to a college professor and have kept them ever since. Basically, he imagines things like the Platonic forms being set loose in 3D form on the English countryside, or the Holy Grail turning up on the altar of an English country parish church. And he was an odd character with the sort of magpie mind that self-educated people tend to bring to things. But he was part of this circle that Tolkien and Lewis flourished in. Tolkien was a devoted Catholic, and as I said, Lewis spent a long time as an agnostic, and Tolkien tried hard, eventually succeeded in part in getting Tolkien or Lewis back to his faith, but it irked him to no end that when the penny finally dropped, Lewis went back to the Church of England rather than to Rome.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, they persevered. They were friends for the rest of their lives. Tolkien and Lewis both became famous in the end and wealthy for books completely outside their fields. Lewis's books on Christian apologetics and his what we would call young adult fiction now have become vast money spinners in movies and television and in print. And in the 60s, Tolkien suddenly found himself besieged in his retirement by hippies from America who had read a little paper book that Ballantine Books had pirated from his English publishers called The Hobbit. And once it took off, they promptly pirated another little project of his called The Lord of the Rings, written for one of his sons. And he became so overwhelmed that he and his wife upped sticks and moved to a town on the coast called Bournemouth, where he thought no one could find them. But by then, Tolkien was virtually rich beyond the dreams of avarice. He regretted he hadn't retired earlier if he had just known that this was going to happen. He ended up dying in 1973, having outlived Lewis by a decade. Lewis kept teaching at Cambridge till a few weeks before he died. And oddly enough, for a man who spent his shadow, more or less, in Tolkien's much larger academic shadow. Lewis's death went unreported in the news for days because he happened to die, as did another English author, Aldous Huxley, on the same day that President Kennedy was assassinated. And it simply blocked all the other news there was. And it was weeks later before many people realized that C.S. Lewis had passed on. So that's the story of how two great authors met, became friends, managed never to despise each other or call each other names, and produced some of the most enduring works in current English literature. So I don't see Steve on screen. I assume he's not available. In that case, I'll tell you we've run out of time today.
Wait, I am available.
Here he is.
Here I am, miracle of modern technology.
You're just in time to say goodbye.
I'm just in time to say goodbye. That was very informative, Lindsay, I've got to say. There's one thing I just want to add before we say goodbye. We had a contest. The lady won, but I'm the only one that really knows what was going on in those golem eyes in that captured photograph. So let me say this. I was absolutely shocked when I realized that there was so much scrap indenture paper floating around Ireland that Felix could do whatever he wanted with them. I mean, from what he saw and showed us, I mean, he showed you stacks of it. So I was just flabbergasted by the fact that there's so much of it there that he could do. As creative as the project was, if he wanted to do a less creative project, they're still there. And oops, I made a mistake. So what? Here's another one. That's what got me. We just don't see that around here. Well, I want to say that's all the time we have. Lindsay, Kara, thank you for joining us. Alan, thank you for putting this show together. We'll be back next week with more book news, talk, collecting tips, and amazing guests. During the week, join us on Rare Book Cafe's Facebook page, where we invite you to post, comment, question, and share us with your friends and relationships. And we love it when you like us. Our shows are archived on the Rare Book Cafe's Facebook page, the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair blog, and the Book Fair's YouTube channel. You can also email us questions of your book, treasures, whatever you'd like us to see, and get a seat here in our internet studio at Rare Book Cafe at gmail.com. The Rare Book Cafe is brought to you by the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair, celebrating 37 years in 2018. Until then, stick with the Rare Book Cafe for a weekly feast of biblio news for book lovers. It's paradise, and we will see you all next week.